This presentation will address the ethical, social, and environmental issues impacting on the industry and external environment of the Special Operations Training and Education Centre. SOTEC is a military training and education organisation that primarily services personnel within the Australian Special Forces and its associated units. The industry can be defined as military training and education entities that facilitate education pathways outside of minimum employment requirements, incorporating a blend of internal and externally delivered content. As an ecosystem, some of the main players include tertiary education providers, travel partners, facility providers, and information technology partners. Noting that strategy is influenced by context, the Ryan Review, a study of Army's education, training, and doctrine needs for the future, brought to light what the organisation can do, highlighting strengths in doctrine, personnel, and learning facilities, and matching this with what it might do, responding to the threat of gaps in human capacity and the opportunity of developing cognitive superiority over adversaries. Following this, an analysis of the strategy practice can be assessed in line with Thompson et al.'s strategy formulation process, setting the strategic vision, setting the objectives, crafting a strategy to achieve the objectives, executing the strategy, and monitoring. Firstly, it has the vision of cognitive advantage. It has objectives linked to technical and personal capabilities. It sets out strategies to achieve the objectives, such as collaborative mechanisms and education frameworks. It sets out strategies to achieve the objectives, such as collaborative mechanisms and educational frameworks. In terms of execution, the organisation clearly identifies the types of courses that are to be targeted, as well as the supporting staff required. To monitor the performance of the strategy, the organisation collects metrics around participation and qualifications gained. A scan of the macro environment using the PESTLE framework, which looks at the political, economic, socio-cultural, technological, legal, and environmental factors that impact upon an industry. It shows that the organisation must be aware of and devise strategy to seize opportunities or mitigate threats brought about by the ethical issues of leadership, the social factor of individual education levels, and the environmental impacts of carbon emissions. On the issue of ethical responsibility, there is an expectation of the ADF to reflect best practice of ethical leadership. There are a number of reports, including the Piper Report of the Review of Sexual and Other Forms of Abuse in Defence, the Broderick Review of Women in the ADF, a number of defence leadership and cultural reviews, all which highlight the need for ethical leadership training and education. The effect that this has had on the defence industry is the need to incorporate relevant training around ethics and leadership. The result has been an increase in funding being made available to implement programs and strategies for remediation or to bring ADF in line with community expectations. In light of Porter's 5 Forces framework, an analysis of the competitive power of suppliers, buyers, the threats of new entrants, substitutes, and competitive rivalry, the power of government as a supplier of funds is very high. Within the industry, this means a more fierce rivalry, as all learning and development units will compete for the increased funds for their programs, and only the ones with the most compelling value proposition are likely to see additional funding. For the organisation, this presents an opportunity. It can leverage existing ecosystem partners and offer new content that is in line with the wider macro expectations and maintain its value proposition for continued funding. The SOTEC Professional Military Education Strategy seeks to provide postgraduate study options to its members despite their current tertiary qualifications. However, the ADF has a minimum education requirement of Year 10 Maths and English, and university postgraduate programs have a minimum of a bachelor's education or equivalent requirement. This social factor has the greatest effect when looking at SOTEC as part of an ecosystem. It creates a gap between the ability to link defence members with university education providers. This becomes a threat to the organisation's competitive advantage. It will affect the value proposition of the organisation if it cannot deliver to users a tangible pathway to tertiary education, and result in a failure to execute the corporate strategy. The organisation uses air and ground transport to move members to the facilities where the courses will be conducted. The transportation industry accounts for 15% of total CO2 emissions, with airlines being a major contributor. According to the International Civil Aviation Organisation, the estimated CO2 emission of a return flight from Sydney to Perth is 422 kilograms per passenger, and our organisation in the past year alone has utilised over 500 passenger flights around the country. As the pressure of action on climate change increases, this will see an effect in the ecosystem impacting travel partners if we want to reduce the use of transport. This will also affect facility providers if we look for the alternatives to learning environments. Reducing travel to address carbon emissions can be an opportunity on a cost basis, but a threat to our business model that relies on travel for face-to-face learning environments. Ethical leadership in defence is currently being addressed internally by embedding specific learning units aimed at ethical leadership within professional development courses. This can be considered a part of what Thompson et al. Consider planned strategy. However, there exists emergent strategy, which is exemplified by the initiative of academic counsellors who collaborate with universities as members of the ecosystem to incorporate elements of ethics and leadership into the courses that they already provide directly to defence. Following a planned strategy while giving space for emergence of new strategic partnerships to meet the vision demonstrates a highly functioning management system to address this issue. To manage the impact of varied education levels, the organisation has collaborated with ecosystem participants to create education pathway programs that will lead to prerequisites being met for entry into postgraduate studies. Internally, the organisation conducts bridging and refresh courses to help members gain the skills that they will need to undertake academic study at a postgraduate level. Reflecting on Lafley and Martin's question for strategic managers, what is our winning aspiration? Where will we play? How will we win? What capabilities are required? And what management systems do we need? This demonstrates how will we win. When our winning aspiration is cognitive advantage, and one of the means of achieving this is through master's level studies, the winning means getting our personnel to meet the prerequisites at a minimum. In light of the solutions that have been formulated to address the social issues of education disparity, the current management is functioning well to serve the strategic goals. The management of any form of climate change response is quite poor. No consideration is made for virtual delivery. Even the movement of personnel is students to the instructor rather than the instructor to the student group. Such a business model is at odds with the expectations of action on climate change. Looking at the current operating environment affected by a pandemic, a focus on face-to-face learning has identified a massive weakness of the organisation's capabilities. With no interstate travel due to a pandemic, all course offerings have been shut down, rendering the value proposition of our education strategy useless. When considering Grant et al.'s views about how an organisation can match what it can do with what it might do, the organisation is poorly placed to deal with the challenges in the external environment. There is the opportunity to enhance the strategic management of environmental factors that impact on the industry. Using scenario planning, which involves assessing strategy against a pessimistic, optimistic, business as usual, and divergent future. A pessimistic view may include customers being less willing or unable to undertake travel interstate, competitors incorporating technology at a faster rate like virtual meeting technology, collaborators seeking wider reach through distance learning, the company remaining focused on face-to-face education, and the context of the industry acknowledging that physical distribution of education has a global climate impact. Such a view may lead the organisation to examine its internal capabilities and assess Lafley and Martin's question around, do we have the right capabilities and management systems? Answering this in light of a pessimistic future may just be the catalyst needed to examine a virtual business model and address issues around ICT and product delivery channels so that the organisation's value proposition is still relevant. Internally, the organisation could use the McKinsey 7S strategy success framework for implementation in the future. The McKinsey 7S framework for strategic success highlights an effective combination of shared values, strategy, structure, systems, style, staff, and skills. Developing a strategy that provides flexibility for virtual learning, the organisation can target systems to ensure that the existence of IT systems are compatible with external education providers and have the bandwidth to accommodate a virtual delivery. This can be combined with skills in development and delivery of education content virtually, staff that are confident in managing virtual education, and a leadership style that is prepared to let frontline workers adapt to the needs of the users with a customer-facing focus.